Good day. How are you today? This is the first of my TV shows for the year, and I'm going to be doing one every week. My first person is Amy Sheldon. She's a legislator. This is your second term. So you've had 2 years, and now you're starting another 2 years because your term's 2 years long. Okay, and how are you doing?
I'm doing really pretty well. I mean, it was an interesting start to the session, kind of as a sophomore, exploring like the next round.
You at least know something how it works.
Yeah, enough to be dangerous. No, it's interesting transitioning to new leadership. I mean, I'm very appreciative that I got to see a seasoned leader in Shap Smith at the end of his tenure as speaker and participate in some pretty significant legislation that started our session last year. The biennium started out in the committee that I was on, where I was on the water committee. We did the Clean Water Act in 2015, and so it was pretty intense beginning to my freshman biennium.
Yeah, because it's a big bill.
Big bill, and also fully engrossed me professionally, because that's the work that I do. So I was able to both contribute, but then also, I remember actually that after 7 weeks, we kind of popped out, and it was like we kind of came out a little, like Poxitawney Phil. That's how I felt coming out of committee. We passed it out of our committee and sent it on to other committees, and I was like, looked up and looked around and was like, oh my gosh, all these other committees are working as hard as we are, but we were working so hard that I was just completely engrossed in what I was doing.
Yeah, it's sometimes hard to know. Since we have 11, 13
standing
committees, and everyone is working on different bills, and then you've got to learn those bills as they go out. You don't have to learn every bill, because we get 1,000 bills and we pass 200 of them, so there's no point in reading 800 of them.
Right, that's right.
But you read because that's just a waste of time, so you try to find out what's going on and what bills they're taking.
Right, what's being taken up, and then read them.
Read them.
Which is, you were always very good at that, so I miss you and your wisdom on the bills and helping anticipate and guide and see where that is. But Robin sits in your seat, so it's kind of fun. I'm in the same seat, so we're at the same height, and I look across and see her.
She's got since your license plate is your seat number. Right. And she's sitting in my seat. She has the same license plate I had.
Yeah. Right. How does that feel when you see her?
I was surprised at first,
right.
But
is that my car?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
So, what issues would you like to speak about today?
I guess what I'd like to talk about, there's some interesting things that have come out of your former committee on judiciary. We just had action on the floor this past week on an issue called expungement, which is when someone who has been convicted of a crime and then also met the requirements of reforming themselves can actually petition the judge to have their record expunged, which means actually closed, deleted.
Gone.
Gone. They get to start over.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting dialogue that happened on the floor. We had a proposed amendment around changing the amount of time and how often someone could petition a judge to have expungement. So I learned a lot about it, and I ended up voting in support of the underlying bill, supporting the committee's work, which was unanimous. I think it was a 10-0-1 vote. Someone was absent.
What did they have laws that are no longer laws, but people are in jail for a law that's no longer in effect, is gone? Was that part of the? I'm thinking of something like we cut out marijuana at one time.
Right.
And but the people were still in jail, but there was no bill and no crime anymore.
Right.
Was that in the bill?
That was I think that's a separate issue from this, but I could be wrong. I do believe we did correct that. But this one, it allows you after 3 years of kind of living on the straight and narrow to clear your record. And we're learning a lot about restorative justice and helping people find a positive way to contribute to society. And I really felt strongly that this bill was one way to clear the path for someone who has reformed their ways to find a a new way of plugging in a productive manner.
That's the whole point of the education while you're in prison, is to get people to do that.
Right, and certain crimes don't qualify, so it's not really a complete, there's a balancing act, and I think they found the right place to balance. The other interesting bill was around sexual assault reforms that came out of judiciary, and in particular, essentially victims' rights bill. It's a right. It's creating funding mechanism for people to have their forensic kits paid for and just included, and standardizing the procedures around collecting the data. Essentially, just a victims' rights bill. And so that is actually, it was a series of bills that I felt like they were really positive and well done, and so I supported those on the floor.
These are all House bills.
Those are House bills, so they're off to the Senate, and
Yeah.
we'll see what the Senate does with them. We did receive the immigration enforcement bill from the Senate, and again in Judiciary this past Friday afternoon, they voted to support the bill. It was the bill that the governor instigated around how our law enforcement officers interact with the ICE agents and other federal agents doing immigration work in the state. So some people say, it's just a symbolic bill, but I think it's an important and symbolic bill. One thing that's different this biennium is that we have the Trump administration, and certainly I haven't heard from a lot of my constituents, but I've had a few very heartfelt letters that I've received from constituents who feel real fear and uncertainty and sort of concern about where the federal government is going to be taking us. And as a legislator, I almost feel, you kind of hold this issue, the fear. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I want to help people find their way and how they can be effective in finding their voice and making a statement on the issues that are affecting them. Certainly Middlebury College has also been in touch around their need for international employees. I mean, they have a real international focus. It's one of the things that distinguishes them among their peer institutions, and the threats that were being promulgated really were significant for them. It seems like that's backed off some, but I think we need to be vigilant. So that's actually another thing that the House leadership has taken up. They have a particular person set up to kind of monitor what's coming out from the federal level and if and how Vermont can react. A third of our budget comes from the federal government. Significant funding for Dr. Dinosaur, other social programs, certainly the Lake Champlain cleanup. So there's great potential that we will be negatively impacted by the changes at the federal level.
Then you wanted to talk about the Ag Bill.
Regenerative agriculture. So I'm a new member of the newly formed or reformed. There were some changes made in the committee structures in the House this year, and one of them, the biggest ones I think were around, one of the biggest ones were around the Natural Resources Committee. So last year I served on Fish, Wildlife, and Water, and we had a separate committee of Natural Resources and Energy, and Agriculture was Agriculture and Forest Products. And this year we now have Natural Resources, Wildlife, and Water is one committee. There's a new committee, Energy and Technology, that's devoted entirely to the renewable or to energy projects and internet technology projects, sort of like the Vermont Health Connect, those big contracts and big projects that the state's needing to take on now. And then agriculture was changed to Agriculture and Forestry, and I joined that committee. And on that,
So instead of forest products, you're now in the whole forestry issue.
that's right. So they kind of kept it all together.
Yeah.
All of the land use planning bills will go through Natural Resources, and so I actually have a forest integrity bill for Act 250 that will be going through the Natural Resources Committee upstairs, where they take those land use planning Act 250 kind of bills. But within agriculture, I'm pretty excited. In the Clean Water Bill in 2015, we had language for healthy soils And in following that up and following through on it, I'm working with Senator Campion. He's got a regenerative agriculture bill on the Senate side, and I introduced a regenerative agriculture bill on the House side, which would create a new position at the Agency of Agriculture devoted to regenerative agriculture and a certification program for it. And so what is regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was just going to ask that question.
So it's a system of farming that utilizes natural systems to renew the resources that you use as opposed to depleting them. So the example, we heard incredible testimony from a man in southern Vermont who's took over his family's farm and has rebuilt the soil health through intensive grazing. And so it's rotational grazing using chickens, turkeys, and sheep in his case. But the continual disturbance and then the integration of organic matter, and it's essentially like really organized daily movements of whatever animals are pasturing in your fields. You create a healthy microbial system in the soils, and he's growing enough hay to cut 3 times a year and feed the animals in the winter months, the ones that he keeps.
Yeah.
He's selling his chicken for $10 a pound. In the Albany area, and he really is actually one of the motivators behind the bill because he needs a certification program so that he can communicate with consumers the benefits of his way of farming, and those benefits are clean water, reduced carbon outputs, and then also the potential to sequester carbon in the soil. So a 1% increase in soil organic matter results in the storage of an additional 20,000 gallons of water. And I won't get the number right, but like 17 metric tons of carbon is sequestered, which is the equivalent of 40,000 miles of an average car driving. So
wow.
There's a lot of potential in this. And
yeah.
It's pretty exciting. I've started doing lots of research on it. It started in France after the Paris talks around the climate, the climate agreement. It's all voluntary, but countries are taking it up and committing to a certain percentage of regenerative agriculture over the next 5 years in order to start actually sequestering the carbon that's in the atmosphere in our soils. So I see this as a rural economic development program because consumers are willing to pay more to our farmers for the products that are grown this way. A clean water project, it's a natural way of cleaning up our waterways, and it's also a climate solutions bill where we can start sequestering the carbon that's in the atmosphere. So I'm super excited about it, and I know that there are people working on this from different angles, and we're kind of coming together and talking about what is the best way to do it. I've talked to NOFA extensively with their policy person about
NOFA.
Thank you. The Organic Farm Association, which is the Vermont version of it. And how are we going to integrate with organic, because consumers already understand what organic means.
Yeah.
And many organic practices line up with regenerative, but they have been more focused on what you're not doing on the farm, and regenerative is trying to focus on what you are doing on the farm in building resources and reducing your impact in cleaning up our waters.
Yeah, that all includes clearing the atmosphere and the water.
Yeah.
And the land itself.
It's pretty exciting. I mean, when this guy Jesse McDougall took over his family's farm, he talked about a cow pond that they would joke about swimming in. It was like all slimy and not swimmable. They'd be throwing hay bales in August. It was hot. Oh, well, you got to go swim in the cow pond. And he said, within 3 years of changing the practices on the farm, that cow pond is swimmable now, and it's cleaned up.
Oh, really?
Yes. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah. And it's necessary for the whole area and the world. I mean, the whole country.
And
are we the first in all this? I mean,
I don't believe
Vermont is usually the first in a lot of things, but.
In this country, I'm not sure. Certainly not in the world. Like I said, France is ahead. It's taking a lead. My sister lives in France, and she and I were just talking on Saturday about there's a shortage of organic products in the market right now because there's such a huge demand in France. And so I'm wondering if the consumers there have gotten ahead of the legislation. But once you start scratching the surface. I mean, in Australia, they're using regenerative agricultural practices to reclaim a lot of their desert, and also in Africa, the same thing. So.
Oh, you can reclaim the desert.
Yeah, a lot of our deserts, it turns out, are the result of human impacts.
Yeah.
And when you start rotational grazing, and I mean, it's essentially the grasslands evolved to have wildlife that, ungulates, which would naturally forage in the grasslands, cycling through them, and that constant disturbance regenerates the soil and enables microbial activity within the soil and organic matter to accumulate such that the soil is alive and holds more water. And the other great thing about holding more water is that is a resilience factor for climate change. If we have a large flood, the soil holds more water, and if you have a drought, that moisture is available for longer on the farm. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, because we have our own desert in the United States, out west.
That's right.
Southwest.
And and farmers out there are starting to utilize these practices with much success also. So it's pretty exciting. There's some details to work out on what does it mean to be certified regenerative, and is it necessary to have a separate certification to organic, and how we work that out is part of the conversation that is called for in the legislation, but it's also part of what's already happening because it's so exciting. I know that there's a branch of our Agency of Agriculture doing this. There's a business consortium group of people looking at how to help promote this. So I think we're on the verge of a.
So you can sell the food, whether it's for the cows or whether it's for the people, and you know that it's going through this process, and
it's legit.
And it's legit, and it is helping the whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, shall we get on to another bill? You have, you did the bill.
Well, we did. I am the co-sponsor of a bill called Act 250, the next 50 years. In 2020, Act 250 actually turns 50, excuse me. And the idea with this bill is to create a commission that is along the lines of the original Gibb Commission that created Act 250 in 1970. And
that was Arthur Gibb.
It was Arthur Gibb.
Weybridge.
Yep, who's one of my kind of heroes, and I'm proud to be following up with this on Act 250. I think that a lot of people don't understand the importance of Act 250 in creating the Vermont that we love today. And when you go into the Natural Resources Committee, you'll also see that there are probably almost a dozen bills up on the wall at different tiers. I was in there Friday afternoon testifying on my two bills that are related to Act 250, and we ended up sorting them all out. And they're like some, I don't want to say smaller because they're very important to the people who are being affected by them, but they're little changes that need to be made to Act 250 to just like really, why is the jurisdiction here, or shouldn't it be there kind of bills. And then there are two medium-sized bills that are around forest integrity and housing in our downtowns. And then there's this commission bill, which is trying to take a holistic look at the status of Act 250, what's working well, what needs to be improved, and we're sort of in the language in the bill says efficiency and effectiveness. And so Chip Conquest from Newberry is the other co-sponsor on the bill, but it creates a 12-person commission that will actually go out to Vermonters and solicit input on, what are the features that are working really well, what are the things that need to change, what are the things that are missing. 50 years ago, we weren't talking about climate change. We didn't have a need to, or we didn't know we had a need. We probably had the need, but we weren't ready to address. So what are the things, what are the new information, what's new information that we need to address, or we can address through land use planning and regulation. The original Act 250 did call for a statewide land use map, and we never implemented that part of it. I think
Yes, it did. Yeah.
asking people, is this a gap? Have other statewide plans filled in the gap? Looking at, is it necessary? So I'm pretty excited about that bill. And, the committee's kind of trying to consider which of the current requests on the wall around Act 250 should wait and be addressed under that bigger process, or can be addressed under the bigger process, versus need to be dealt with now.
Yeah, because it's true, and I had forgotten it, but you have one issue, and you have 10 bills,
Right.
all affecting that one issue. So in fact, when you put one bill out, you're putting 10 or 11 or 12 bills out.
That's right.
Because of all, some of them are very similar, and some are a little different, and some of them have 1 point, and some of them have 10 points.
And some conflict directly.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
when you're in a committee, you have to work out all these bills, and not just say, so this one bill is okay, but all these have to have maybe amendments to it or
Right.
deductions from it.
Yeah.
So that's part of your work.
Yeah.
It's difficult to keep all this in mind all the time, but I think you're doing a good job on it.
Yeah.
I can see.
To trust your colleagues in their committees and how that works.
Yeah, because they're studying it. Even if you're in a different committee, you learn what's going on in other committees, and you understand the issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, better as you get there, longer and longer.
Yeah. Related to that, though, I just would say that we have the forest integrity. I introduced a forest integrity bill, which is a follow-up to the forestry work that we did last year. And then last year's work was around requiring planning for forested blocks at the regional and town levels.
For what?
For forest blocks, so large areas
Oh.
of intact forested areas, and also how those forested blocks are connected. What we learned last biennium was that from like 1890 through till very recently, Vermont was adding forest. We went from 25% forested around the turn of the last century to 80% forested around the turn of this century.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the last few decades, we've seen a decrease in our large areas or not just the large areas, we've seen a decrease in forested land cover. And we still have a lot of it, but in order for us to maintain our forested working landscape and also maintain all of the benefits that we all get from our forests, and those include clean water and wildlife habitat, recreational areas,
Air.
clean air, absolutely. So there's a interest in what are we doing to promote the forest industry, and how can we support it by way of protecting these large areas? Because what we hear in testimony is that loggers and foresters, there's a sort of scale issue where if forested lands become so small, there's no longer an ability to get a return on investment by logging them. So maintaining the big ones are what's important.
I was this morning in the radio talked about how the new people came, in the 1600s, 1700s here, and they chopped everything down
Right.
because they wanted farmland. And I guess the farmland was good, but getting all those trunk roots out must have been,
It's amazing to
in the
think about how-
1600s, must
Right.
have been some other,
Right.
some job. But so it changed the whole forest. The whole forest was working together.
Yeah.
And then they just cut it all
Oh,
down.
where did you hear that?
On the radio this morning.
On public radio or?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there's amazing stuff. I mean, in my line of work in doing river work, we know that there were, estimates that it's like there was 3 feet more of topsoil in the hills of the Green Mountains before they were cut.
Yeah.
And we cut them and farmed them thinking it was really fertile soil, but then it all washed down and it's now in Lake Champlain. So it's very interesting the impacts we have without even being aware of what we've done.
Mm-hmm.
But the ability for natural systems to rebound, and in the instance of the regenerative ag bill, and the same is true, there's a regenerative forestry part of that as well, where our forests come back. But essentially, this forest integrity bill is looking at using Act 250 and adding a criteria to protect our forests. Then there's also a big push for creating workforce housing or middle class housing, and part of that is a bill up on the wall around that. And I'm seeing these two things as same, like two sides of the same coin, where we can increase density in our downtowns if we also, commensurate with that, try to reduce the spread of housing out into the forests and, try to keep those large areas of undeveloped spaces open.
Does that affect farmers? In other words, put the into buildings and homes and so forth on old farms?
Well, to some extent, it may be that, but right now we have 5 designations for downtown areas that are somewhat different, but they're still the attempt in all of them is to create a boundary around the village that would contain the growth and provide opportunities to increase density in the way that we're familiar with our village as being dense, if that makes sense. So the same pattern of development.
We're doing it here in Middleburg. We have this Marble Works with all the businesses.
Right.
And then we have a large paper business, and then this condo has 30 homes in this condo.
Yeah.
And they're all ages. Occasionally we have even a child in there, which we do now. We have a child in there in one of the families. So that's nice. That's kind of fun to watch. I don't see them often, but every now and then you see them and playing around.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's what you're thinking about. We could put another condo down there somewhere.
Right.
Or we could put, the stories are 2 flights. I mean, there's businesses upstairs, more like office businesses upstairs.
Right,
and then
yeah,
food businesses and restaurants and pharmacy and other things there.
Right. So that's one of the things that that's happening, is sort of this idea that we could go up, we can increase density and have walkable opportunities for people to get to the grocery store and get to the movies and wherever they want to go. So those are sort of 2 medium-sized Act 250 things that are on the docket that are happening. We also have in ag, if we have another minute here to talk about it, there's a bill around farm accessory uses that we are debating right now, and it's looking at trying to, you mentioned farmers, it made me think of it, trying to, the value-added agricultural products and actual production facilities on farms have been questioned. Additionally, events are starting to happen on farmlands, and so there's a conversation around what is it that is actually a farm accessory use that supports the underlying farm business, and what are the other things that, like, does a wedding really relate to agriculture, and is it fair for us to say, oh, farmers can just have a certain number of weddings every year, but the adjacent property.
What does weddings have to?
Well, a lot of farms have weddings to help make ends meet.
Oh.
So it's agritourism. People want to have their wedding on a farm, and it's a pretty big business now.
Oh, wow.
So there's a section of the currently proposed bill that includes an exemption for farms around events, which is the most controversial part of the bill and the conversation that we're having.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you for coming, and you're really quite busy.
Yes.
Yes. And thank you for listening, and hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me,
Bye-bye.
Betty.
Yeah, you're welcome. Bye-bye.